And I love the idea of Blinken being like, we'd love to see you resolve this Syrian thing that happened. I don't know, how did that happen? What went down? The waning power of the U.S. empire, which is really important if we want to see a peaceful and sustainable world. The U.S. should not be an empire. At maximum, it should be a country, but maybe we'll get rid of those one day too. But anyway, so Antony Blinken, Biden's Secretary of State, who, giant war hawk, representative of the empire all around. And, who knows how many decisions Biden's actually making. So it really might be Blinken making most of them. So Blinken traveled to Saudi Arabia, and it was pretty disastrous, a trip, which is good news for the world.
For the world.
Anything
that's bad for the empire is generally good news for
us. It's like when you like with Darth Vader, you're like, well, one of those guys up there dressed in all black stubs his toe. It's good for everybody else.
Is that what happened here? This is the equivalent of stubbing the toe of Darth Vader?
Yes. U.S. Secretary of State Tony Blinken concluded his 3-day visit to Saudi Arabia last Thursday. He was the second U.S. official to visit the kingdom in less than a month, after National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. And the U.S. is sending all these officials, by the way, over to Saudi Arabia because they're in a panic over Saudi Arabia particularly, but the Middle East and Arab countries in general, not just doing whatever the U.S. wants at all times, and actually working towards peace in many regards. Now, Saudi Arabia has a lot of fucking issues and decapitates people in the streets if they're, gay or something. So it's not that Saudi Arabia is the greatest monarchy.
But isn't that the thing? It's like we've
set the bar so low
where Saudi Arabia can be the good guy.
Yeah.
It's like when you're agreeing with Kissinger, who was like, we shouldn't be fucking around with Ukraine. You're like, what kind of world are we in?
Well, the U.S. empire set the bar so low that even Saudi Arabia seems like a peace-filled country. So anyway, Tony Blinken's visit was widely seen as a desperate attempt by the Biden administration to hold on to its closest ally in the West Asian region. Before Blinken started his tour, he had stated that normalization of Saudi-Israel relations was one of the top priorities of his government. However, reports now, normalization, it's the U.S. way of saying they don't want Saudi Arabia to keep pressuring Israel. Like, don't do anything that Israel doesn't like. That's what their view of normalization. Reports indicate that Blinken not only failed to get any assurance from the Saudis on that front, but had to concede some crucial ground on significant regional issues as well. Blinken reiterated his government's resolve to work for Israel-Saudi normalization in a speech, and he was then contradicted by Faisal Ben Farhan, who pointed out that, quote, normalization of ties with Israel will have limited benefit without a pathway to peace for the Palestinians. So basically, Saudi Arabia continues to say that Palestinians should have peace, that they should have their own nation, that they should be respected and given human rights. And the U.S. and Israel are not really down with that.
May I change the subject momentarily to respond to a question?
Okay.
I'm sorry. Jerry asked a question here. Why is Biden able to call to stop a strike, and the difference between what is going on in France? Good question. Basically, the difference is that in France, they don't give a shit if the president tells them to stop. And there's a lot of reasons for this. One is that there is, I actually spoke with an organizer in France and I asked her, like, is there just, y'all just have a culture of just like setting shit on fire when you don't like something? And she's like, yeah, we kind of do. So there is that culture in France that this is what you do when the ruling elite pushes you too far. Now, of course, in France, they have adapted to a lot of shittiness that they shouldn't have. And I'm sure that they agree with me too. We've all adapted to the, as Lee puts it, the gravity of capitalism. But the difference is that there's that culture in France, but I think also really powerfully, there is a bit of a net to fall back into. So for instance, if the rail workers were to call Biden's bluff and he fired all of them, what do? You don't have free healthcare like you do in France. The structures are not set up. There are a lot of structures of like mutual aid and things in France, like this woman told me, who I interviewed, that would be willing to take care of your kid. Also, daycare is free in France anyway. That would be willing to bring you food and things. We don't have that, and that is on purpose, right? They wanted to make sure that we couldn't call their bluff, that they would have that power, because they know that we have that power. But if we have nothing to fall back on, if they pull everything out from under us, if it's just an abyss, that puts them in a really sweet spot. So I'd say that that's the difference. Those are two really important differences. And I'm sorry, I just wanted to get to that. Now we can go back to Saudi Arabia and Palestine.
That's okay. I don't know where we were though.
You had just finished talking about how, well, if you go back to you like covering my face.
To the podcast viewers, listeners, they have no idea what you're talking about. Just every once in a while, you randomly go, thanks for that.
So you were just talking about how the issue with Israel will have a limited benefit without a pathway to peace for Palestinians. And that is certainly not something that the U.S. wants to hear, being Israel's main sugar daddy.
Yeah.
And supporting this apartheid state and their continued oppression of the Palestinians. So that's certainly not what Blinken wanted to hear when he went to Saudi Arabia.
Right. And in another significant development, the U.S. seems to have toned down its objections to Arab countries normalizing their relations with Syria. So the U.S. has spent a lot of time and money trying to turn Syria into a failed state, trying to just obliterate that whole area, whether through actual bombs or economic war. You have 90-some%. I believe it's 94% of Syrians are now below the poverty line. That's how horrific this economic war against them has been. And now you have the Arab countries, even the ones allied with the United States, bringing Syria back into the fold as a regular member of the Arab countries groups. So, that when they get together to discuss things like similar to the G7, but for different regions of the world. In another significant, I read that part. The joint statement expressed support for the Arab countries' efforts to resolve the Syrian crisis in a step-for-step manner. I love the idea of Blinken being like, we'd love to see you resolve this Syrian thing that happened. I don't know, how did that happen? What went down?
Also, step for step sounds a lot like the proper channels argument with whistleblowers. Like, if you just gone through the proper channels, you wouldn't have to leak all this information. We have this set up to completely ignore you and make sure that your life is a living hell for the rest of your days.
Right. The outcome of Blinken's visit to Saudi Arabia is similar to the outcome of Joe Biden's visit to the kingdom last year, when he failed to convince MBS to increase oil production to ease global prices. It fits into growing speculations that the GCC becoming more autonomous. And what's GCC stand for again? GCC members. I lost it. I know it's
acronyms are.
I know it's the group. Oh, Global Coalition. Gulf Cooperation Council. Gulf Cooperation Council.
This sounds so nice, doesn't it?
Well, that's supposed to sound nice.
I know.
Becoming more autonomous and no longer towing the U.S. line. So yet again, I feel like I come with a story every day of how the U.S. is losing power around the world. And, that is a good thing on so many levels. It can mean a sustainable world. It can mean a peace-filled world. It can mean that countries get along and are not at the point of a gun at all times as to whether they're going to do exactly what benefits the U.S. and what allows a tiny cabal of individuals to continue to enrich themselves. So this is yet more evidence. And Saudi Arabia is one of our closest allies. I mean, they're really the ones that allow the petrodollar system to even function. And here they are again and again and again is standing up against U.S. pressure, which is a very new thing. This is new and impressive.